All right. Good morning, folks. It's still morning, ever so barely. We're here on Thursday, the 21st. Yesterday was our invasive or introduced species. Today, we're going to talk about how you deal with them. So, let me make sure that it's my active window before I click on this and randomly you guys take it to a news site that does not concern you. There we go. I thought this was a good first statement to work with. If you've been working on your project where you had to identify an invasive species, you then had to find out where did it go, which should be somewhere in North America, and where did it come from. And then you had to go over the adaptations that it had that are making it a problem in that new environment, and finally going back to see why isn't it a problem in its home environment? What controls it there? So, if you've been doing that, you've probably invariably seen that basically none of the invasive species that we see are something good. They're just not. They come in, they mess things up. To put it in a teenage viewpoint, it's like somebody new moving into the school and kicking you out of your friend group because they're cooler than you. So now all of your friends want to hang out with them and you are lost, left, and forgotten, right? Like it disrupts the balance that everything had. It provokes conflict. The problem is the introduced species generally have some new tools to it. Now, this may look ridiculous, but how do you control invasive species? Well, this is one of the ways. People load up with automatic weapons into helicopters and, in this case, fly around shooting them. Now, this obviously is not going to be a highly successful tactic in most cases. You need an animal that is large enough to be targeted. I'm not going to talk about exactly what those are in case somebody is currently doing the research on it. But it is crazy. Literally, people will pay to get armed and go up in helicopters just to shoot at these things. Why? Because it's an invasive species, it's not wanted, and because the federal and local environmental agencies have declared effectively open war on it. And their rule is you kill as many as you can, as often as you can. We don't care. Really, what it's going to come down to, though, is you got two choices. You either try to eradicate the infestation, the introduction, which means that you just want to kill every single one of them. Case in point, and I know I can talk about this because Max already turned his in, but the Asian giant hornet that has come in on the west coast, people are concerned about that because it is an invasive or introduced species. And all of their efforts thus far are strictly trying to eradicate it. They're not working on controlling it, they just want to make it dead. Now, obviously, there's some downsides to that, and that is acceptable damage to other species. For instance, you guys may not have heard about this, but ever since the news picked up on the giant Asian hornet and the fact that a few of them have been found on the west coast, people have been destroying hundreds of thousands of beehives, hornet nests, wasp nests, everything like that, because they're just like, oh, I don't know what it is. That might be it. Burn it, kill it with fire. So when we say acceptable damage, that doesn't just mean from the eradication effort itself. It's also that side of the public consciousness where people are now aware of it and they start to go vigilante on it. Now, eradication is usually the first choice. Because if you can eliminate it, that is going to be best for the environment in the long term. But maybe you find out too late. Maybe the government moves too slow to eradicate. Then we have to step into control. And when we say control, it's still going to be killing them. We're still trying to reduce their population. But now we're not trying to get rid of them completely. We just want to reduce them so that their impacts to the other species and the other ecosystems are more limited than they would be otherwise. That's the difference between control and eradication. Now, this is the generally accepted invasion curve for when a new species shows up, right? The beginning is introduction. When it's in green, what that means is that we could take care of it, but it's also generally small enough that we don't notice it. By the time we detect it, if we move very quickly, maybe, maybe we're okay of it. Here's the problem that this graph doesn't show you. This detection point doesn't have to be this low. It can be anywhere from here all the way up to the public awareness. Sometimes we don't know about it until people start to notice it. And at that point, you can see eradication is unlikely. It would be intense and it probably won't work. By the time something hits stage 3, basically what we're saying is it is here now. There is no removing it. There is no stopping it. Now the best we can do is try to control the population. Now, all of this may seem like kind of gloom and doom and stuff like that, and it's not good, but environments are also pretty flexible, and tomorrow I'll be able to give you some examples of that. But just understand that this graph is important when we try to determine how do we go about it. Now, this is the same idea, but it's a little bit better delineated or explained. Basically, what they're saying is this yellow area here, where the infestation is at its highest, there's just no point. We're not going to wipe it out. We're not going to eliminate it. The cost is too great. So here, maybe we want to slow it down if we can. In this orange circle, the advancing area, now we might be able to stop them. We might be able to eliminate a couple of these branches to reduce how many of them get out into the outlier. And the red circle, this is where we'd actually focus our efforts because this is where it's still feasible. We eliminate them as they spread beyond this point and we try to stay ahead of it. Now, some people go to the extreme. If you're looking at this image and you're saying to yourself, is that man water skiing? The answer is yes. If you're saying, wait, is he holding a katana? The answer is also yes. If you're asking, is that a football helmet on top of his head with a giant slab of metal and spikes put through it? The answer is also yes. Um, Sometimes, in order to control problem populations, some people go to the extremes. I'm not going to go any further into this one right now because, once again, somebody might be working on this. If they are, they probably already know that image because, boy, let me tell you, the carp hunters have become kind of a thing. All right, so let me give you guys a real example of a full ecological destruction from an invasive species. And for that, we're going to look at the little brown tree snake. Now, the brown tree snake is a poisonous snake, but with rear mounted fangs. So its fangs are way back in its mouth towards the back. They're also not hollow, they have like a channel, like a groove. So when they bite, then like saliva glands push the venom along the groove, and it just sort of gets into the wound that was made. So they're not like a rattlesnake in how they bite or deliver their toxin. They're not super big. When they're born, they're about 24 centimeters long, which, is slightly over like a foot. At their maximum, they can grow pretty big, about 9 feet long. But they're a thin kind of skinny snake. They're not a big, thick one. Well, the brown tree snake normally lives in Australia, New Guinea, and Indonesia. That's its home range. That's where it's from. But after World War II, it popped up in the island nation of Guam. Now, to put this in perspective, Guam doesn't have any snakes, except Now, the brown tree snake. The island separated. There were no snakes on the island when it broke free or was created by a volcano, and so there were no snakes. Now there is. But needless to say, if you don't have anything on your island that hunts snakes or has ever seen one before, one of the adaptations that the brown tree snake has to give it an advantage is the fact that nothing's going to eat it. Since its introduction about 60 years ago, 9 out of the 11 native species of birds have gone extinct on Guam. Completely extinct, it has annihilated them. Why? Because the brown tree snake eats birds, eggs, bats, and lizards. And so, with a diet of both the mother bird and or the eggs that she lays, you can imagine what happens. Once it's up in the trees, which is where it lives, it finds a nest and it doesn't matter what's home, it's going to eat it. Even worse, most of these birds have never seen a snake before, so they don't even know that it's dangerous. So 9 of the 11 have all gone extinct. There's only 2 species of birds left on the island of Guam. Now imagine if this were to happen here in New York State. Imagine if blue jays, robins, starlings, let's just pick a whole bunch of songbirds, red-winged blackbirds, goldfinches, chickadees, like all of them were to go extinct. All wiped out by something else. That's a problem. That's a real problem. What happens to the other animals that want to eat these or their eggs? No more food for them. What happens to the other predator, or what happens to the other animals that rely on it, like plants, berry bushes, flowers, because they expect these to spread the seeds and help in pollination? Now there are none. And if you remember when I said what the brown tree snake eats, it doesn't just eat birds. It's also driven more than half of the local lizard species extinct. And so now almost all of their skinks and lizards of different forms are gone, further screwing up their ecosystem. But if you remember, that's not all they eat. They also eat bats. And 2 out of their 3 bat species are extinct now. So the brown tree snake has been an ecological disaster, the likes of which we rarely see. There are more than 34 species of plants living on Guam that are now starting to die off because, once again, there is no pollinator in order to help them or to spread their seeds because there just aren't enough birds left or bats. So we see a problem. And if we want to put this in a monetary term, it's important to take a look at the amount of money. So the brown tree snake will coil themselves and move between electrical wires. If you're holding on to one electrical wire, you're safe. That's why birds can sit on them. But what happens if you cross 2 electrical wires? Zippity zappity. And so they're spending more than $4 million per year just to repair electrical lines because the snakes will crawl across 2 of the lines and short them out, starting fires, causing all sorts of problems. 1 out of every 1,000 hospital cases is from a brown tree snake bite because they are venomous. They have difficulty injecting venom into people because of how far back their fangs are, but when you have that many, it's still going to happen. And this one isn't really clear. Guam doesn't want to release that kind of data, but they're estimating anywhere from 593 million to 2.5 billion lost in revenue from tourism every year because now people don't want to go there. It's covered in snakes. This here you can see is their GDP, gross domestic product. This is the amount of money that the country makes. And you can see that in the last decade, it hasn't been going well, largely due to the brown tree snake. Now, let me also give you an idea of what the problem is. All right, So right now they estimate there are about 2 million snakes on the island of Guam, which makes it the largest concentration of any snake anywhere in the world. There is nowhere else in the world where you will find more snakes per square mile than you will on than Guam. Now, to put 225 square miles um, to something you might understand better, all right. So the entire island of Guam is 44% the size of New York State. So take New York State, cut it down to half the available size. That's the size of Guam. 2 million snakes in something half the size of New York State. Little under. And it gets even scarier if you do the math between the number of snakes compared to the number of people. And then there are more snakes on that island than there are people. And there's only one type of snake, it's all brown tree snake. At this point, it hits that infestation level. There's really not much we can do. That hasn't stopped them from trying, though. So they looked at a couple different options. The first option was to go to Australia, get some of the predators from there, bring them over, and then release those predators onto Guam, hoping that they will then eat the brown tree snake. The reason that this one was kind of released, they didn't do it, was because they determined that the predators are what we call generalists. They're not specialists. They don't only eat brown tree snakes, they eat brown tree snakes and everything else. So they decided that's not going to help too much. Another option, which is unacceptable, is the bottom one. Do nothing, as our little meme shows. Once again, that will not help the issue. Which means that we're really down to trying to do one of two things. Either release some sort of virus that will target that snake on the island to try to kill it, or to try to poison and trap the snakes to keep them controlled. Unfortunately, snake viruses are a really tricky thing, and there's no way to guarantee that they won't jump to other lizards and stuff like that. So people were really iffy about releasing a biological um, virus out there. So right now they are doing large scale poisoning and trapping. They take hundreds of millions of mice and rats, they stuff them full of poison, and then they airdrop them over the island with the hopes that the tree snakes will find them, eat them, and then die. Not necessarily the best approach. But this is called a biological control, and this is the most important aspect of this whole thing, is going through and understanding what a biological control is. And in most cases, this is our best solution. And it's trying to use something living to control the population of that invasive species. One case where it has been done successfully was Australia. If you remember the rabbits we talked about yesterday, they've got they released this virus called the MYXOMA myxoma virus, I think it was. And what it does is it causes this terrible like facial tumor growth on rabbits and kills them. They released it first sometime around 1970 something, and it killed 99% of the rabbits that were in Australia. If you remember yesterday, I told you I wasn't going to tell you what they did just yet. Well, it was the virus. 99 plus percent. Let me ask you this though. Do you think that it killed all the rabbits? No, didn't kill all the rabbits. Which rabbits were then left? The weak susceptible ones or the hardy resistant ones? Yeah, resistance. Remember our uh, remember our bacterial resistance thing? Works the same way. They released the second round of the virus in the 80s. It killed 75% of the rabbits. They released a third round of it in the 90s. It killed 25% of the rabbits. It's estimated right now that if they were to release it again, it would kill roughly 0% of the rabbits. Because natural selection took hold and it evolved resistance. So I want you guys to keep this in mind when you're going through and when you're starting to finish up your project. Because a control, what controls their population, that's part of the presentation. Now, you don't need to go over what they're doing in the new place. Because usually, if it's a problem population, the issue is we don't have a good solution to it. But I would like to know what controls them in their home environment. Is there a virus? Are there predators? What is it that keeps their numbers controlled there that isn't doing it here? So, that project should be due tomorrow. Once again, I suggest Google Slides. It doesn't need to be more than 4 or 5 slides long unless you want it to be. And you need to cover the name of the invasive, where it came from, what new adaptations does it have that are giving it the advantage, that are making it a problem, and how was it controlled in its old home native environment. Just those four. So, with that, I'll see folks on Friday. I hope it helps and it's been interesting. Have a good day.